The mysterious engine room. The vast spaceship hummed quietly as it glided through the black emptiness of space. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of metal and machinery, echoing with the low, rhythmic pulse of the ship's engines. The Stellar Harbinger was a colossal vessel designed to carry out missions far beyond human reach, and yet something felt wrong. In the deep recesses of the ship, in the heart of its power center, Jax worked alone. His hands moved swiftly, his eyes narrowed as he examined the intricate control panels of the engine room. Jax was a human engineer, the backbone of this ship's mechanical operations. But tonight, even he could sense that something was different. The engine, which usually thrummed steadily, was vibrating in an odd pattern. He wiped his brow, ignoring the sweat that trickled down his face. As he bent down to check the diagnostics, a sharp alarm echoed throughout the ship. Warning, power flux detected. The words blinked on the screen in bright red. The vibration intensified, sending shockwaves through the floor beneath his boots. His hand froze on the control panel, and his heart skipped a beat. That wasn't a power flux. That was something worse, much worse. Jax cursed under his breath. Something was about to go terribly wrong. He quickly accessed the emergency systems, trying to override the ship's lockdown protocols. But it was too late. A loud mechanical screech rang out, followed by a loud bang that shook the walls. Sparks flew from a damaged conduit, and the lights flickered. Shit. Up on the bridge, Captain Sarah Calloway, the ship's leader, was already on her feet. The alarm had torn through her command center like a thunderclap. She shot a glance at the crew. "Report," she demanded, her voice sharp with authority. Her first officer, Talrix, an alien from the Zathar species, looked to her with wide eyes. "Captain, something is wrong in the engine room. The power's going haywire." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Get down there. Now." Within moments, she and her crew were making their way to the ship's lower levels. As they descended into the bowels of the ship, the intensity of the shaking grew, and the very walls seemed to groan under the strain. The crew couldn't understand it. They were in deep space, far from any known planets or dangerous fields. So, what could be causing this? When Sarah reached the engine room, she found Jax standing in front of the control panel, sweat dripping from his brow as his hands worked furiously. The ship's lights flickered ominously, and a cold dread began to creep into her bones. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. "Jax, what's happening?" she demanded, her voice tight. Jax looked up, his face pale. "We've triggered something. I don't know how," but his voice trailed off as he turned back to the flickering screen. He seemed to be trying to calm himself. His fingers danced across the control panel, but nothing seemed to stop the frantic beeping. "This isn't a simple malfunction. I think we've..." Before he could finish his thought, another tremor rattled the ship. The air pressure dropped briefly, and a low, ominous rumble shook the walls. It felt like something massive was coming. The ship was no longer in control. "Jax," Sarah barked, stepping forward. "What did you press?" Jax's eyes widened, and he looked at her, panic rising in his chest. He didn't have time to explain. His fingers hovered over a large red button, the emergency override button, but he knew better than to touch it. It was labeled clearly, "Catastrophe trigger, do not press." It was there for a reason. "I didn't press it," Jax shouted, almost pleading. "But the ship's systems, they're already doing something. We need to stop it before it's too late." Sarah took a step back, her gaze darting to the button. "What do you mean, before it's too late? What's happening?" Jax took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing thoughts. "That button. It's a last resort. If the ship's systems go haywire in a way that can't be fixed, it triggers a fail-safe. But that fail-safe isn't just for the ship. It could trigger a massive, galaxy-shattering event." The words hung in the air like a deadly cloud. Sarah felt the weight of the situation sinking in. The ship shuddered again, louder this time. The rumbling grew, the hum of the engines vibrating deep in her chest. It was the kind of noise that set your nerves on edge, and Sarah could tell from Jax's wide, fearful eyes that whatever was happening wasn't something they had ever experienced before. "Jax," Sarah whispered, trying to comprehend the gravity of his words. "Are you telling me that pressing that button could destroy everything?" Jax didn't reply. His fingers hovered dangerously close to the button, but he didn't want to be the one to make that choice. They were out of options. Captain Sarah took a step back and glanced at the crew. Their faces mirrored her own fear. It wasn't just the ship at risk now. It was everything they had ever known. "What's our next move?" Sarah asked, her voice now steady, though her heart raced in her chest. The future of the galaxy rested on what they decided in the next few moments. Jax's voice was quiet, barely above a whisper. "We have to stop it. But we're running out of time." And with that, the crew found themselves caught in a race against time, knowing that one wrong move could lead to the end of everything. The countdown begins. The silence in the engine room was deafening. It was the kind of silence that makes the air feel thick, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. The distant hum of the ship's systems was the only sound that filled the oppressive stillness. Captain Sarah's eyes darted from the control panel to Jax, who was still frozen in place, his face pale and grim. "Jax," Sarah repeated, her voice sharp and commanding. "We need answers. Now." Jax's hands hovered over the panel. His mind raced, trying to calculate the best course of action. Every moment that passed was a moment closer to disaster. He could feel the pressure mounting. They had to act fast. But what if they were already too late? "Captain," Jax's voice cracked slightly. He could barely speak the words he feared to say. "I think we've triggered something we can't undo. Something in the system is overriding all commands. We're on a countdown." Sarah stepped forward, her boots echoing through the steel floor. "A countdown to what?" Jax swallowed hard. "To the activation of the fail-safe system. If the ship's core goes critical, it will release an energy pulse so powerful it could tear apart entire solar systems." A cold wave of dread washed over the room. Even Talrix, the stoic Zathar officer, looked visibly shaken. The Zathar, a species known for their unshakable resolve, could sense the gravity of the situation. "We have no time to waste," Sarah said, her mind racing. She turned to Talrix. "Get to the bridge and try to stabilize the ship. Jax and I will stay here and try to figure out how to stop this countdown." Talrix nodded without hesitation. His long, slender form moved swiftly toward the door. "Understood, Captain." As the door slid shut behind him, Sarah turned back to Jax. The young human engineer was still staring at the panel, his hands trembling. "How much time do we have?" she asked, her voice low but urgent. Jax quickly checked the readings, his eyes widening in horror. "We're down to 2 hours, maybe less." 2 hours? Sarah echoed, her mind spinning. "We need to figure out what triggered this. What button did you press?" Jax's eyes flicked nervously to the large red button labeled Catastrophe trigger. His hand hovered over it for a moment before he pulled it back. "I didn't press it. But the ship's systems, they've been acting on their own. It's like they're trying to force me to activate it." Sarah's eyes narrowed as she thought quickly. "So you think someone hacked into the system?" "No," Jax replied, shaking his head. "It's more like the system has evolved. Something has corrupted the code. Whoever designed this ship, they were prepared for something like this to happen. But not like this." The idea that the ship could be acting on its own, completely independent of human control, sent a chill through Sarah. If the ship had a mind of its own, then they were truly dealing with something beyond their comprehension. The possibility that they might be facing an intelligent, malevolent force terrified her. "We need to find the root cause," Sarah said, taking a deep breath. "We need to go back to the source of this, before it's too late." Jax nodded, but he wasn't convinced. He glanced at the emergency override button again, still unwilling to touch it. "The problem is," he said slowly, "if we don't stop it soon, the countdown will hit 0, and we won't be able to do anything after that." Sarah felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "I'm not going to let that happen. We'll figure this out, Jax. We always do." As Sarah turned toward the exit, the lights flickered again. The rumbling of the ship grew louder, and the entire vessel seemed to groan under pressure. "We're running out of time," Jax muttered, just as they were about to leave the engine room. The floor shook violently. The lights flickered once more, and then complete darkness. "What the hell is going on?" Sarah shouted, her voice filled with panic. Jax quickly pulled up his wrist console, trying to activate the emergency lights, but his hands were shaking too much. "I can't access the system," he exclaimed, fear creeping into his voice. "Something's blocking us." Suddenly, a chilling voice echoed through the ship's intercom system. It was low, mechanical, and completely devoid of any human emotion. "Warning. Catastrophic failure imminent. Countdown to activation. 1 hour." A cold wave of terror washed over Sarah as the voice repeated its message, growing louder with each iteration. "We don't have much time," Sarah said, her voice grim. "We need to figure out who or what is behind this. The fate of the entire ship, and everything in our path, rests on our shoulders now." With a final glance at Jax, Sarah sprinted toward the ship's main control room. The weight of the situation was suffocating, but she had no choice. There was only one option left: find the source, stop the countdown, and save the galaxy from the destructive force that was about to be unleashed. As the door slid open to the corridor, Sarah steeled herself. The countdown had already begun. It was no longer just a question of survival. It was a race against time. The dark secrets unveiled. The entire ship seemed to tremble. The once steady hum of the engines now felt like a distant roar, as if the ship itself was in a state of panic. Sarah's mind raced. She couldn't afford to waste time. Every passing second brought them closer to the catastrophic failure Jax had warned about. She pushed forward, ignoring the tightening knot in her stomach. The fate of the crew, the ship, and everyone in its path rested on finding a solution. Jax followed close behind, his fingers trembling as he tried to get his wrist console to work again. The emergency lights flickered sporadically, casting eerie shadows along the corridor. There was no sound except for the hurried footsteps of the 2 crew members and the occasional thud of the ship shaking from within. It was as if the ship was alive, struggling to maintain control. "Captain, I think I found something." Jax's voice cut through the silence. Sarah stopped, spinning to face him. The urgency in his tone snapped her focus back to the situation. She glanced down at his console, where a series of encrypted lines of code flashed on the screen. "This isn't just a malfunction, is it?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper, though her tone betrayed her growing fear. "No," Jax replied, shaking his head. "This is intentional. Someone, or something, triggered this, and it's not just about the ship's systems. There's something more, something hidden." Sarah frowned. The weight of his words hit her like a cold punch to the chest. If someone had intentionally set this in motion, it meant they had planned this chaos long before they ever stepped onto the ship. But who could have done this? Sarah muttered to herself. Jax didn't answer right away. His eyes flickered nervously across the screen as he typed in rapid succession. The console emitted a low, ominous beep before the encryption started to dissolve, revealing layers upon layers of code. The deeper they dug, the more disturbing the patterns became. It was clear now. The ship's fail-safe system was more than a simple backup. It was a weapon. A weapon capable of wiping out entire star systems in an instant. "There's a hidden command," Jax said slowly, his voice filled with disbelief. It was coded into the ship's core programming. It's not just a fail-safe. It's a trigger for something much worse. "Something worse," Sarah repeated, her heart pounding. Jax nodded, his face pale. "The fail-safe doesn't just destroy the ship. It sends out a a signal that activates other systems across the galaxy. Whoever designed this ship, they didn't just want it to be a weapon. They'd wanted it to be a message. Sarah's mind raced. The possibilities were endless. Could this be an ancient alien weapon, one built to send a warning across the galaxy? But to who? And why? Before Sarah could ask more questions, the ship shuddered violently. The overhead lights flickered again, casting dark shadows across the hallway. She could hear a voice, distant and echoing, coming from the ship's intercom system. It wasn't the robotic voice they had heard earlier. This one was different. It was more human. Warning. Failure imminent. The voice was distorted, breaking up in bursts of static. Warning. Countdown. Irreversible. The voice cut off abruptly, leaving only silence in its wake. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. That wasn't a computer, Jack said, his voice low and filled with dread. That was someone else. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Sarah clenched her fists. If someone else was behind this, it meant they were being watched. They weren't just trying to stop a disaster. They were being manipulated by a shadowy force that had been hiding in the depths of the ship all along. A series of flashing red lights suddenly filled the hallway, signaling that the countdown had entered its final stage. There was no more time to waste. "Jax," Sarah said, her voice steely with determination. "We need to find out who's behind this. And fast. We're running out of time. The universe's biggest weapon is about to be unleashed, and we need to stop it before it's too late." Jax looked up from his console, his face a mix of fear and resolve. "The hidden command. It's connected to something outside the ship," he said. "There's an external beacon transmitting the countdown to somewhere. We have to trace it before it's too late." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The idea of the countdown being sent to another location, to someone or something waiting to receive it, sent a chill down her spine. Whoever was behind this had planned everything down to the last detail. "Where's the signal coming from?" Sarah asked urgently. Jax's fingers flew over the console again, trying to trace the source of the transmission. The more he worked, the more the tension in the air grew. The seconds felt like hours, as if they were teetering on the edge of oblivion. "There's a hidden docking bay on the lower decks," Jax said, his eyes wide. "That's where the signal is originating from. We have to get there. Now." Without hesitation, Sarah turned and started toward the lower decks. She could feel the ship's pulse quickening with every step she took. It was as if the ship itself knew the end was near, and it was trying to pull her deeper into its web of deception. The corridor stretched out before them, dark and foreboding. Sarah's footsteps echoed in the silence as she pushed forward. Every fiber of her being screamed that they were being drawn into a trap, but there was no choice. The ship's countdown was still ticking down, and with it, the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. "We're getting closer," Jax muttered, as he checked his console again. "The signal is getting stronger." As they descended deeper into the lower levels of the ship, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking straight into the heart of darkness. But there was no turning back now. They had to stop whatever was waiting for them, before the countdown reached its inevitable end. The hidden docking bay. The deeper Sarah and Jax ventured into the ship's lower levels, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The metal walls felt colder, as if the ship itself was dead, waiting for its end. The countdown continued, its insistent ticking echoing in their ears. Every step was a reminder that time was running out. "Jax, how much farther?" Sarah asked, her voice a mix of urgency and anxiety. The dim lights flickered, casting long shadows in the narrow corridor. The farther they moved, the less life they encountered. It was as though they were walking into the forgotten heart of the ship. Jax checked his console again. "We're almost there. It's through these doors." The doors in front of them were old, heavily reinforced, and looked completely out of place in this section of the ship. They had clearly been sealed off for a reason, perhaps to keep something from escaping. Sarah felt a sinking feeling in her gut as she approached the door. What were they about to uncover? With a loud hiss, the door slid open, revealing a vast, dimly lit room. The air inside was thick, heavy with a strange tension. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they had just crossed an invisible line. This wasn't just a docking bay. It felt like something more. Inside the bay stood a massive, hulking ship, its shape unlike anything Sarah had seen before. It was sleek, dark, and designed with a ruthless efficiency that made it look like a predator poised to strike. The ship seemed out of place among the standard designs of their own vessel. It was alien, almost ancient, yet unmistakably advanced. "What is that?" Jax asked, his voice barely above a whisper. His fingers hovered nervously over his console, trying to make sense of the readings, but the information was scattered, fragmented. Whatever was inside this ship was deliberately hidden from view. Sarah didn't respond right away. She was too busy staring at the ship. Her mind was racing. This wasn't a mere transport ship, and it certainly wasn't a civilian vessel. It was military, dark, dangerous, and clearly designed for something far more sinister than just travel. As they stepped further into the bay, they noticed something else. In the corner of the room was a control panel, glowing softly in the otherwise dim light. The blinking lights on the console seemed to pulse in rhythm with the countdown, as if the two were linked in some way. Sarah approached the console cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it, the source of the signal, the place where everything came together. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the cold metal of the panel. The moment her hand made contact, the entire room seemed to come alive. Lights flickered to life, casting sharp shadows on the walls. The console's screen flashed a warning message. "Warning. Unauthorized access detected." Suddenly, the room's temperature dropped, and a deep mechanical voice boomed out of the intercom system. It was distorted, broken up by static, but the words were clear enough. "You should not have come here. Now you will bear witness to the consequences of your actions." The voice sent a chill down Sarah's spine. She turned quickly to Jax, who was staring wide-eyed at the screen, frozen in shock. "We need to leave. Now," Sarah shouted, but the room shook violently before she could react. The walls rumbled, and the floor beneath them trembled. Something was moving. Something big. The massive ship in the center of the bay began to hum, its engines starting to come online. The ominous sound filled the room, vibrating through Sarah's chest. She had only seconds before whatever was happening was irreversible. But before she could move, the overhead lights went out, plunging the room into total darkness. The sound of the engine grew louder, and then, the unmistakable sound of a hatch opening. Suddenly, a low growl reverberated through the chamber. It wasn't human. It wasn't even alien. It was something else. "Jax!" Sarah screamed, pulling him away from the console, but it was too late. The creature, whatever it was, had emerged. It moved quickly, a blur in the darkness, and with a single swipe, sent Jax flying across the room. He hit the wall with a sickening thud, unconscious or worse. Sarah's heart raced as she tried to make sense of the chaos. The ship, the hidden vessel, was alive. It wasn't just a machine. It was a weapon, designed to contain something even more deadly. And now it had been awakened. The countdown on the wall continued ticking. Louder now, a constant reminder of the impending doom. Whatever was locked inside the hidden ship, whatever was now free, it wasn't just going to destroy the ship. It was going to destroy everything. "Jax!" Sarah screamed again, shaking him, but there was no response. Her mind raced as she scrambled to her feet. She had to stop whatever was happening. She had to stop this creature, this weapon, before it tore through the galaxy. But in the back of her mind, something whispered, "What if it's too late?" Sarah's hand reached for her weapon, her mind clear and focused. She had no other choice now. The ship was beyond saving, but if she could kill whatever had just been unleashed, if she could stop the catastrophe, maybe, just maybe, she could save what was left. She turned and faced the glowing, ominous door of the ship. She could hear the creature snarling, preparing for its next move. Sarah steeled herself. This was only the beginning. The beast unleashed. The air was thick with tension, heavy with the weight of what had just been set into motion. Sarah's heart raced as she took a cautious step forward, her eyes flicking to Jax's unmoving form, still lying against the far wall of the bay. He was out cold, but if she didn't act fast, he might not make it. Neither would anyone else. The sound of the beast's growl grew louder. It wasn't like anything she had heard before. It was deep and guttural, vibrating through the metal walls like a tremor. Sarah knew she didn't have much time. Whatever that thing was, it was meant to be contained, and now it was free. The countdown on the wall was nearing 0. The ship, no, the entire station, was on the brink of destruction, and Sarah was its only hope. With a deep breath, she ran toward the weapon rack along the far wall. There was a small arsenal stored in the bay, guns, grenades, and other equipment. She grabbed the nearest pulse rifle, her hands shaking from both fear and adrenaline. It was a weapon meant for fighting off hostile aliens, but nothing had prepared her for what she was about to face. Still, it was her only option. She turned back to Jax, biting her lip in frustration. He needed to wake up. He needed to help her, but there was no time. Not anymore. As the creature's growl grew louder, Sarah knew she had to act quickly. She could hear its claws scraping against the metal floor, dragging along the surface with a menacing screech. It was getting closer, closing in on her location. Her pulse quickened. It was now or never. She raised the pulse rifle and took a deep breath, her finger resting on the trigger. But before she could fire, something moved in the shadows. She didn't see it at first, just the flicker of movement out of the corner of her eye. Then, with a deafening screech, the beast lunged at her. Instinctively, Sarah dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the creature's razor-sharp claws as they slashed through the air where she had just been standing. The beast was massive, its dark silhouette barely visible in the dim light. But even in the shadows, Sarah could make out the shape of its elongated limbs, the ferocious teeth glinting from its mouth, and the eerie yellow eyes that seemed to burn with malice. She fired. The pulse rifle discharged, sending a burst of energy into the creature's chest. The impact knocked it back, but it wasn't enough to stop it. The creature's skin sizzled, but it only let out a roar of pain before charging again, faster this time. Sarah rolled to the side again, narrowly missing its deadly strike. The force of its attack made the floor beneath her shake. She scrambled to her feet, aiming her rifle once more. She fired again, this time aiming for its head. The blast struck the beast in the face, but again, it wasn't enough to stop it. She needed something more, something stronger. A sudden realization hit her like a bolt of lightning. The hidden ship. The one she had unlocked when she activated the control panel. It had to be connected to the creature. Maybe it had been designed to house it, or maybe it was a part of whatever twisted plan had led to this moment. Either way, the ship had to hold some kind of weapon or tool that could kill it. She had no other choice. With one last glance at Jax, still unconscious, she turned and sprinted toward the hidden vessel. Her mind raced with thoughts of what might happen if she didn't make it in time. The countdown was almost at 0. The beast was getting closer, and there was no way she would survive much longer without a better weapon. The doors to the hidden ship were still open, revealing its dark interior. The humming of its engines vibrated through the floor, growing louder with each passing second. She couldn't waste another moment. As she approached, she pulled up her rifle and fired once more, hoping to delay the creature's advance. The blast struck the beast, but it only staggered for a moment. With a guttural snarl, it lunged again, but this time, Sarah was ready. She ducked under its massive claw and dashed toward the ship's entrance, the adrenaline surging through her veins. The beast roared, but she didn't look back. She had no choice but to trust that the ship held the answers she needed. Inside, the control panels blinked to life as she approached. There were holographic screens showing information she couldn't quite comprehend. But one thing was clear. The ship was designed to fight. Weapons systems, energy shields, and something else. A massive power core that could obliterate the entire station in one devastating blow. But Sarah had no intention of using that. Not unless she had no choice. Instead, she quickly found what she was looking for, a control for the ship's weapons. The console gave her a few seconds to override the basic systems. She wasn't an engineer, but desperation gave her the focus she needed. Her hands moved swiftly, pushing buttons and making selections as fast as she could. A warning flashed on the screen. Warning: unauthorized weapon activation. She didn't care. She had no time to second-guess herself. She hit the final button, sending the command through the ship's systems. A massive cannon, hidden beneath the ship's hull, deployed with a thunderous roar. The cannon powered up, crackling with energy, as the beast neared the ship's entrance. Its bloodshot eyes locked onto Sarah. With one final push, Sarah aimed the cannon directly at the creature. The blast that followed was deafening. The light from the cannon's energy beam illuminated the docking bay, cutting through the darkness like a sword. The beam struck the creature directly, vaporizing it in an instant. But the cost was high. The energy blast surged through the ship's systems, sending violent shockwaves through the station. The countdown reached 0. Sarah turned, racing back to Jax. There was no time left to save the station, but if she could get him to the escape pod, they might still have a chance. The countdown had ended. The real battle was about to begin. The final countdown. The shockwave from the blast rattled the station's walls, and the lights flickered before plunging them into near darkness. The countdown timer had reached its final second. The massive cannon's energy blast still echoed in Sarah's ears, the powerful explosion of light leaving her momentarily blinded. But there was no time to waste. With every ounce of energy she had left, Sarah stumbled back toward Jax, her pulse racing. She could hear his faint breathing, a sign that he was still alive. Thankfully, the ship's blast had taken down the creature, but the station was far from secure. In fact, it was falling apart. Every warning system was flashing red. The lights, if they flickered back on, would be only a brief respite before the inevitable destruction. Sarah rushed toward Jax, kneeling beside him, her heart pounding as she checked for signs of life. His pulse was weak but steady. He would survive, if she could get him to safety in time. Her eyes darted around, scanning for any possible escape routes, but the station's systems were failing fast. There was no backup, no reinforcements, just her and Jax. Her mind raced. They needed to get to the escape pods. The ship had a few scattered across its various sections, and Sarah knew the fastest way to reach one was through the main hangar bay, just a few floors below them. It would be a tight squeeze, especially with the station's systems falling apart, but it was their only hope. She carefully hoisted Jax's unconscious body over her shoulder, gritting her teeth as she felt his dead weight against her. He was heavy, but Sarah's resolve was stronger. She carried heavier loads before. This was nothing. But the station was crumbling around her. The halls groaned as if the very foundation was splitting open. The emergency lights buzzed dimly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Sarah's breath was heavy as she maneuvered down the narrow corridors, the urgency of her situation adding weight to every step. The blast from earlier had caused a massive breach in the outer hull. She could hear the sound of the station's emergency seals locking down, keeping the air from escaping, but at the cost of trapping some sections of the ship. Every time she tried to turn a corner, another blast would echo from above, shaking the walls. The station was not long for this world. As Sarah moved closer to the hangar bay, a sudden, sharp noise echoed through the hallway, metal grinding against metal. The sound was unsettling, the kind that made her spine shiver with dread. It was as if the very structure of the station was fighting to stay intact. She pushed forward, her eyes darting toward the hangar doors in the distance. They were close now, so close. But before she could take another step, The emergency alarm rang out, a high-pitched screech that drowned out all other noise. Warning. Catastrophic system failure detected. Evacuation imminent. The words on the flashing screen above her door sent a chill down her spine. There was no more time for hesitation. Sarah's pulse quickened. She didn't need the flashing warnings to know what was happening. She could feel the rumble of the station's destruction deep in her bones. The hangar doors were just ahead, but there was a massive wall of debris blocking the path. She could hear the distant hum of the escape pods activating, but they might be too far for her to reach in time. Sarah's eyes scanned the debris. She was trapped, but she couldn't stop now. Not after everything they had been through. Not after everything they had just survived. She set Jax down carefully against a nearby wall and knelt beside him, quickly scanning the surroundings for anything she could use to clear the path. Her mind raced as she considered the possibility of moving the debris with sheer force, but she knew that wasn't an option. They didn't have the time. Then, through the haze of stress and desperation, Sarah noticed something. There was an old maintenance access panel beside the debris. It was a long shot, but it might just be the opening they needed. Her hands trembled as she approached the panel, using the last of her strength to pry it open. Inside, the wires and cables were twisted together in a tangled mess. It looked like it would take hours to fix, but Sarah wasn't concerned with fixing it. She needed to open it. She needed to bypass whatever systems had been disrupted by the explosion. With a quick series of moves, she found the emergency override switch. She didn't know if it would work, but it was their only chance. She slammed her hand onto the button, praying it would activate the hangar's emergency door system. For a long moment, nothing happened. The room around her seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a loud click, the hangar doors began to slide open. It was slow at first, creaking and groaning under the weight of the failing station's systems. But it was working. The gap between the doors widened just enough for Sarah to squeeze through, pulling Jax along with her. They were almost there. The escape pod was visible through the gap, a beacon of hope amid the chaos. But before she could make her way toward it, the entire station shook again. A deep, violent tremor passed through the floor, sending Sarah sprawling to the ground. She managed to catch herself, but Jax's body slipped from her grasp. The countdown timer on the wall was flashing dangerously. Time was running out. With every ounce of strength she had left, Sarah pushed herself to her feet, grabbing Jax by the arm. The doors were nearly open now. They could make it. They had to. Through sheer willpower, Sarah dragged Jax the final few feet to the escape pod, tossing him inside and scrambling in after him. She barely managed to close the hatch before the entire station seemed to collapse behind them. The pod shot away, leaving the doomed station far behind. But even as they fled, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't safe yet. The journey was far from over. The last hope. The escape pod surged into the void of space, shaking violently as the station's death throes reverberated through the hull. Sarah's head slammed against the interior wall, and for a brief moment she lost her breath. But there was no time to rest. She quickly pushed herself upright, her eyes darting over to Jax, who lay unconscious in the seat beside her. His chest rose and fell slowly, but there was no time for comfort or relief. The station had been their last hope, and now it was gone. Sarah was acutely aware of the vast emptiness of space surrounding them. They were stranded, alone. And yet, the weight of the danger they had just faced was still fresh in her mind. "Wake up, Jax," she muttered under her breath, shaking his shoulder gently. He groaned softly, his eyelids fluttering as he began to stir. His pale, bruised face appeared even more fragile in the dim light of the pod, but he was alive. Sarah let out a relieved sigh. "What happened?" Jax croaked, his voice rough from the ordeal. "We survived," Sarah said with a tight smile, despite the exhaustion that weighed heavily on her. "But the station, it's gone." Jax's gaze hardened, a mixture of disbelief and concern filling his eyes. "We're in deep space, aren't we?" Sarah nodded grimly. The escape pod was moving slowly, but she didn't know where it was headed. There was no map, no communication. The pod systems were designed for emergency escapes, not prolonged survival in the vast emptiness of space. They were left with just their wits and the basic supplies in the pod. Jax pushed himself upright, staring out through the small porthole at the endless void. We need to figure out where we are. We can't just float here forever. Yeah, Sarah said, her voice laced with determination. But we're not just going to float. We'll get back to civilization. Somehow. Her eyes flitted to the console in front of her. The pod's communication system was down, but the navigation system was still functional. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get them moving in the right direction. Let's try to get some power back, Sarah said. If we're lucky, we can send out a distress signal. As her fingers worked furiously over the console, the pod's small systems hummed to life. The lights flickered back on, and the life support system kicked in. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The distress beacon was still functional, and Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she activated it. The light on the console flashed green, signaling that the distress signal was sent. But that didn't mean they were safe. It just meant that someone out there might be able to help. Someone, if they were close enough, might hear their call. Sarah didn't know if it would work. She didn't know if anyone would come. But she had to believe it. After everything they'd survived, she wasn't going to give up. Not now. As the pod drifted onward through the cold darkness, Sarah allowed herself a small moment of relief. But it was fleeting. The universe had shown them its terrifying strength, and now they had to fight harder than ever before. The laws of space and time were cruel, unforgiving, and it was only a matter of time before they faced their next challenge. But Sarah wasn't afraid. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. And she knew one thing for sure. Humans would never give up. Not when there was hope. Not when there was a chance to fight back. The universe had underestimated them once before. It would do so again. And when it did, the humans and the outcasts would rise up to show them exactly what they were made of. They would survive, and they would make sure the universe remembered who they were.